This is part 2 of our video on the four beasts. In our last video, and there's a link in the description if you want to watch it, we discussed that Daniel's four beasts seem to be forming right before our eyes, and that the conflict in Ukraine, if it escalates, may be the causative factor. In that previous video, we discussed that the beasts arise when the four winds of heaven stir the sea or Gentile nations. We found that out in Daniel chapter 7 verses 2 and 3. And then in Zechariah chapter 6, the prophet told us that these four winds are the four horses of the apocalypse. So when the four horses stir the Gentile nations, that's when the four beasts arise. Jesus told us in Matthew 24, 4 through 7, that this period of the horses would be marked by false messiahs, wars between nations and kingdoms who may be the four beasts, by the way, famine, pestilence, and potentially nuclear explosions, which Jesus called by the Greek word seismos, or great shakings. We also discussed how an escalation of the Ukraine crisis could lead to those things: war between various confederation of nations, famine caused by hyperinflation and economic collapse, pestilence from releasing bioweapons stored in the Ukraine biolabs, and nuclear explosions as a retaliation against the bioweapon release. Although all these things are only potential at this point, there is a good chance of each of these things happening within the next year or so, if so many of us would believe that we would be in the 70th week of Daniel and that the four beast empires would be likely. In fact, seeing the four beast empires form is a sure sign that we are in the 70th week. So with that as a background, let's look at what Scripture tells us about these empires and what nations are going to be part of each empire and how they interact and war with each other. In that previous video, we also discussed 5 proofs that absolutely confirm that the beasts are future and form at a time of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But as we look at who these beasts might be, you might say that the characteristics of those beasts kind of resemble the ancient kingdoms of Babylon, Persia, and Greece. And guess what? They do. But did you notice in Daniel, the first 3 beasts are referred to as being like a lion, like a bear, and like a leopard. So they are like the ancient kingdoms. They aren't exactly those ancient kingdoms. They're just like them in certain ways. They share characteristics that are mentioned in the text of Daniel 7. Let's look at the lion first. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and then it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. The lion was the symbol of Babylon, as we learn in Jeremiah 4:7. So the end-time beast will be like Babylon. Maybe it's Mystery Babylon. And that's our guess, by the way. Eagle's wings were the symbol of King Nebuchadnezzar from Ezekiel 17:5. And the phrase, the lion being given a man's mind, is from the account in Daniel 4, where Nebuchadnezzar became a beast for, catch this, 7 years. Perhaps this means that Mystery Babylon will be beast-like for 7 years in the end times. Now, what's Mystery Babylon? We have done a whole series of videos on this topic. If you've been following this channel, you know that we believe the biblical evidence indicates it's a globalist government run by its merchants, the billionaires, people like Bill Gates and Zuckerberg, and that the nations will surrender their national sovereignty to the system. This system comes out of the Western democratic nations, but it's not a benign force. Revelation tells us it's drunk on the blood of the saints and it enslaves many. It is a beast controlled by a demonic force. If you want to refresh your understanding, a link to that series is down in the description and at the end of this video. Now, the Russian invasion of Ukraine might be the tipping point for the creation of this beast confederation. Notice how the Western democracies align almost immediately with each other against Russia in a way we haven't seen in a very long time. If Russia or these democracies are foolish enough to use limited nuclear weapons, or if the Western sanctions result in an economic collapse of all nations, well, that might be the impetus to surrender national rights and form this beast. Here is a map of what nations we think might form the beast like a lion, or Mystery Babylon. As we indicated in a previous video, the Russian invasion was based on Putin's fear of this coming system, which he is more than aware of. He's part of the World Economic Forum, after all. And that's why he wants a buffer of nations on his eastern border to protect himself from the rest of Europe and this coming beast that's like a lion. If you haven't noticed, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Hezbollah of Lebanon have all aligned with Russia in this conflict. It's a really rather unsavory group. They're calling themselves the 4+1, and Syria is even planning on sending 40,000 troops to the Ukraine. Is this confederation the second beast, the bear, and is it beginning to form? I know what you're thinking. The fact that the symbol or ideograph of current modern-day Russia is a bear is just like too convenient. Isn't this newspaper exegesis of the worst kind? Well, certainly we'd agree that just because the current symbol of Russia is a bear, that's not adequate evidence alone that it is the bear of Daniel's 4 beasts in Daniel 7. Many nations in the history of the world have had bears as their national animal, and it's clear that we shouldn't be considering national animals at all. For instance, Pakistan's national animal is the leopard. No one, and I mean no one, has looked at this vision and considered the third beast, the leopard, to be Pakistan, and neither do we. But if we're considering the beast to be national animals, well, then it would be. So there has to be more to it than that. National animals are not the symbols that are used in this portion of the Bible. But let's look at what Daniel says about the bear. Another beast, a second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. Okay, first, who are the they who command the bear to devour much meat? Why, the spiritual winds of heaven who are stirring up the great sea back in Daniel 7:2. So this is a God-ordained consumption. And this certainly sounds like what these nations would like to do, the ones we listed, Russia, Syria, Iran. They would like to consume other nations. Does this alone make them the bear? No. But they are raised up on one side, as Russia is much more powerful than all the other nations we listed combined. Also, Russia is stronger on one side. 3/4 of its population is on the eastern landmass of the country. And, this was the same kind of situation that existed with Medo-Persian, the empire historically that many thought was the bear. Persia was stronger than Media, and its population density was on its eastern edge, just like we're considering with Russia, Iran, Syria, etc. And now Iran or Persia is part of this alliance. Did you notice that? So that seems to fit this analogy as well. Will this group consume 3 ribs or 3 nations before this conflict is done? Well, time's going to tell. But for now, our working theory is this might be the bear. In fact, if you read closely, the bear is only told to consume much flesh after the 3 ribs are in its mouth. So its real attack comes after it eats the 3 ribs. It is our guess that the lion forms first, when the 4 spirits stir up the great sea. But the bear nations of Russia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon choose not to join Mystery Babylon. They're afraid of Mystery Babylon. What other nations might be part of the bear and avoid joining Mystery Babylon? Well, Venezuela is already aligned with Russia, and of course Belarus is as well. Here is a map of the potential nations in the beast like a bear. What about China? China is still deciding what side of the Ukraine crisis to take, Russia or the Western democracies. I don't know if you noticed that. My personal thinking is China is going to try to stay neutral, both now and in the future when Mystery Babylon forms. We think China is the kings of the East mentioned in Revelation 16 and don't really join any of the beast empires. But that's just our opinion. There's no way for us to know. India and Brazil aren't really Russian allies, but neither of them chose to join the Western nations in sanctioning Russia either. I don't know if you knew that. We expect both of these other two nations to remain neutral as well, and here is a map of the neutral nations. So let's try to identify the three ribs. The prophecy says three ribs, in our opinion, countries, will appear in the mouth of the bear. The Hebrew word for rib can also mean side. So three side countries will appear in the mouth of the bear. And only then is the bear told to arise and eat much flesh. So who are these countries? We think perhaps Ukraine is one. I mean, that kind of seems to be an obvious answer, but what about the other two? Russia doesn't only align with these countries, sort of like it aligned with Belarus. It eats them. They're in its mouth. So right now, although Russia seems bogged down in Ukrainian mud and the sanctions seem way too effective, Russia is going to consume two more countries, or at least the Bear Alliance is going to consume two more countries. So even though Russia is not advancing like they expected, they are going to acquire three ribs in their mouth. So who are the other two nations other than Ukraine? Well, it's anyone's guess. Maybe Latvia and Estonia. They could be considered ribs. Now, why does a bear attack? Well, when it's robbed of its cubs. In Hosea 13:8, the Bible tells us, like a bear robbed of its cubs, I will tear open their chests. Latvia and Estonia were part of the former Soviet Empire, so they are cubs of the main Russia, so to speak. So that's our best guess. But when this happens, we don't know. But after these three side countries appear in the mouth of the bear, then a more significant war is about to begin. A nuclear war? Well, maybe. The war of the second seal of Revelation? Perhaps. The rider of the red horse is given a great sword. Perhaps this represents nuclear weapons. So that's the bear. What about the third beast, the leopard? The leopard is much easier to identify. Let's look at what Daniel tells us about it. Another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. 4 heads sounds just like the 4 horns that the goat is broken up into in Daniel 8. We know the goat is Yavon and that it conquers Iran in Daniel 8. Yavon is an ancient empire that existed in the region of the Bosphorus Straits in the area of Istanbul. Now, there's no country there right now. It's actually partially Turkey, partially Greece. So what is this nation? Our best guess is that it's an Islamic caliphate that arises based out of Istanbul, which was formerly known as Constantinople. That was the capital of the old Ottoman Empire, and Sunni Muslim clerics have stated that only Istanbul should be the capital of any new caliphate. So that location would be perfect if that is the capital of a caliphate. It matches the Bible perfectly. So it's our opinion that when the Western nations form Mystery Babylon, a UN-based globalist government after all, the bear nations will resist. The Sunni Muslim nations will resist as well and form a caliphate for mutual protection. The Bible calls this the goat. So we believe in the next several years this is going to take place, that the world will be divided into 3 great alliances: the lion, the bear, which is somewhat smaller, and the leopard, which is smaller still. But as we know from Daniel 8, prior to the coming of the beast empire, the Antichrist empire, the goat will attack Iran and defeat it, becoming a Mideast superpower. We know from Daniel 8 that after this great victory, The goat is going to be split into 4 sub-nations, just like the leopard has 4 heads, and its leader is going to be killed. Who does this? Our guess is either the lion or the bear, or both in combination. If you look at the map of the goat, it's significantly smaller than the other beast alliances. But after gaining Iran and likely Syria and Iraq as well, it becomes large enough to worry the other beasts. So our thought is that they're going to split it up into 4 subnations, much like Germany was split up after World War II. This then is going to lead to the final beast, the beast of Revelation. How this beast is constructed is found in Revelation 13. Let's see what it says again. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. So the 4th beast in Revelation is made up of parts of the other 3 beasts. It is the leopard. In other words, it includes all of the former goat empire, all 4 sections that the goat was divided into, brought back together in the beast empire. Second, it has the mouth of a lion. This means it acquires an important part of the lion or Mystery Babylon. What is the mouth of Mystery Babylon? It's the part that speaks. Is this the capital of Mystery Babylon? Well, maybe. Our assumption is that that capital is either going to be Neom, which is currently being built in Saudi Arabia, or maybe even Jerusalem. Those are our 2 best guesses. Third, it's going to contain the feet of the bear. This would be the southernmost aspect of the bear, because the feet are on the bottom. Maybe that would just be Iran, Iraq, and Syria. You know, remember, the goat is going to conquer those regions. They could be the feet. Maybe it also includes some of the Stan countries like Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, etc. All of these are Muslim countries, and any or all of them could be considered the feet of the bear because they're all south of Russia. Since the 4th beast has 10 horns or kings, we assume 10 Islamic nations will make up the beast empire. But the first step in this process is the formation of Mystery Babylon, the lion. And we believe that that process has already begun. Click right here to keep watching and explore the entire series of videos we have about why Mystery Babylon is a globalist empire and how it arises according to the Bible and current events. This is Nelson, and I'll see you there.